So, Walt, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Let everybody know who you are and a little bit about you.
Hey, man, I appreciate you having me on. My name is Walt Settlemyre. I am currently a paramedic for the past 30 years in Central Texas in the Austin area. Former Army guy, infantry and comms. I was a firefighter for a while, then moved into EMS full time. I did special operations in the EMS side, both as a tactical medic and as a rescue medic. And now I'm more within field operations.
Very cool. So, you don't like to have easy jobs. So, you've never worked at a bank or at a restaurant or anything like that. It's just,
I
you have to have a tourniquet with you at all your jobs.
Funny you would mention, I went through a litany of careers before
Oh,
from
okay.
between the military and when I went into fire service. I was a restaurant manager. I worked in high-end men's retail. I worked in a bike shop for a while. I had a very short stint as a stockbroker, which I hated.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I started some careers, and then nothing appealed to me like public safety did.
Very cool. Yeah, man, that's a calling. That's not a job. That's not a career. That is a calling. And that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of parents, they're kind of intimidating about, learning first aid. That seems like this big thing. Oh, I don't know if I want to know first aid, all that kind of stuff. Being a medical professional, is first aid something that the average parent like me can learn and actually use in an emergency?
It absolutely is, and I think now more than ever, it is so much of what the training out there is geared towards the layperson, someone who can pick it up quickly. The Take 10 now for if what's CPR has now become, used to be like a 2-day class for CPR. Now they have Take 10. Now we've gone to just simply compressions because they found through a lot of the science and through just evidence-based medicine that the key is just continuing to move blood through the system. It's not, because that blood will remain oxygenated for 10 to 12 minutes. And so that's pretty quick. And you can learn that quickly. It's just compressions, right?
Mhm.
Um, Also, Stop the Bleed is a pretty quick course. I believe it's 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken, for the official Stop the Bleed course. There are different sets of it, but Stop the Bleed is huge because most accidents are some sort of bleeding, and bleeding is how you're gonna, you know, possibly die from bleeding out. I mean, we found that from the battlefield. That's been one of some amazing medicine that's come from the battlefield that's made its way into not only EMS but into trauma suites, into everyday life for Americans.
Very cool. There's a lot of stuff that you're going to learn in a stop the bleed class and in first aid and things like that. For like if your neighbor asks you, what is it that I absolutely need to know if something happens to me, to a loved one? What's one skill that I definitely need to have to just to be a good citizen?
Oh, tourniquet application is one of your biggest. Tourniquet application is huge. I would say something that goes hand in hand with that is staying calm. And I think we'll talk about that a
Mhm.
little bit later on,
Sure. Yeah.
but staying calm. Often when someone calls 911 or something happens, we have that tendency to, our heart rate spikes, we lose fine motor skills, that taking a second, taking a breath, that goes hand in hand with any emergency.
Yeah.
And the tourniquet is definitely one of the key skills to have. And it's super easy to learn. It's easy to practice, and it's fun in some ways, right? Depending on how much you like, but
Right.
if you enjoy like training and learning and understanding, it is fun. So I think so anyway.
Very cool. And you talked about staying calm, and I think that's a good one. A lot of people think, when an emergency happens, they're just going to somehow get the skills of Chuck Norris, or they're just going to be like super calm and everything is going to go right. You've done this for a very long time. I bet there are times when you realize, hey, my heart's going, my adrenaline's going here. I need to calm it down because we're not going to be perfect out there, right? In an emergency.
Yeah, so often we're not. I'm fortunate. I've been doing this so long that I do have a stress inoculation. Sometimes almost not, almost to my detriment, because I don't get as excited about things as I once did. I'm like, I think I should be more upset about this. Right now, I'm just like, it'll be fine.
Mhm.
But for sure, I see a lot of people, because most people meet me, call me, not call 911, and I show up, and it's their worst day. It's a
Mhm.
car accident. It's
Right.
a loved one's cardiac arrest, or a family member, or a child's gotten hurt. And what's difficult is when you have, especially with a parent and a child, because a child keys off a parent very easily. And if the parent's upset, the child's like, I should be upset too. Right. So
Mhm.
especially if it's like I've had a child who was bitten by a dog once, and it was a pretty severe bite, but the mom was incredible, calm, cool, collected. She understood. And it makes my job so much easier because the kid's already freaked out. And so, you have a lot of guys showing up, and or gals, right? You suddenly have a fire crew and two paramedics and people, and now you're the center of attention.
Sure.
And for kids, that's very like, oh my God, this is and so when the parents are very calm and cool, it's huge. But even so, someone who's in a car wreck, right? It makes it much more difficult if someone's in an accident or something happens to them when they're just freaking out, for lack of a better word, right? When they're screaming and yelling, like I'm trying to articulate to them, hey, look, I'm here to help you. We're trying to get things in. But if they if they stay at that high level of agitation, it's harder and harder to treat them, explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing it, or because there definitely is some like, hey, you help me help you. We got to work together to get you into my ambulance, to get you to a hospital.
Yeah, and that's fantastic stuff. And just speaking as somebody who, could need an ambulance, any day now for whatever reason, I want, the people who show up to help me to be super calm, because if they're all like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's not gonna, that's not gonna make me feel good. I was like, oh, I've never seen this before. That's definitely not what I want to see in my rescue folks. So you talked about 911 a minute ago. We've all heard these crazy like 911 calls. Somebody calls 911 because like the McDonald's cheeseburger wasn't prepared the same way. It all seems ludicrous. Tell us, when do we really actually need to call 911 for a medical emergency?
This is such a double-edged sword because it's people should call if they it when in doubt, you should call 911. But by the same token, there needs to be some a little bit more critical thinking skills with that. I get calls often for people who have a fever, or who I've had a guy call who had a paper cut, or I've had some really like, or people will drive by and see a homeless person sleeping a bus bench, and they're like, oh, that guy doesn't look good, and he's just sleeping. And I come by and wake him up, and he's mad at me now, right? I'm like, hey, somebody
Mm-hmm.
called, right? So
Mm-hmm.
but whenever in doubt, like, call 911, right? Because you want somebody to come be able to explain to you how you need to fix this problem that you have, because that's what we do. We mitigate chaos. Unfortunately, we've also become a catch-all for a lot
Mm-hmm.
of things. We've become people's personal physicians. We've become their therapists. I run any number of calls that are psychiatric calls that I
Mm-hmm.
am woefully undertrained for. But
Right.
I'm just like, hey, man, and we always kind of go with this, like, hey, don't call me to a problem you don't want me to fix, right? So I just try to figure out how to get you where you need to be. And sometimes it's someone who's in crisis, or someone who like, I can't get my medications. Okay, we try to facilitate that. And we're lucky in the system that I work for. We actually have a group of paramedics that actually do that, called community health paramedics. It's a very robust program. But to your question, uh, if you're not sure, call 911. Often, if it's something you truly need 911 for, you'll know to call, right? And you'll
Mm-hmm.
call. If it's someone has a seizure, or there's a cardiac arrest, or someone's having difficulty breathing, it's some of the calls that and we see a lot of them that are just more innocuous and unusual to me. Like the paper cut,
Mm-hmm.
that's come up several times on my podcast. But the guy who's a well-educated guy, beautiful home, beautiful Audi R8 in the driveway, and I took him to the hospital in an ambulance for a paper cut because he thought it might get infected. And I'm like, it probably won't if you keep it clean, right? But by the same token, I'm there to take you to the hospital if you want to
Right.
go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Like I said, right? We always want people to call 911 if they need help or if they don't know what to do. But by the same token, it's we want to rely on people's critical thinking skills and doing some problem solving on their own. Like if it's I've had people. Central Texas is notorious for allergies. I've had people like, hey, I just moved here, and I think I've got allergies. I'm like, okay, well, have you taken anything? It's like, no. And I'm like, well, okay. So it was just things like that, right? So
Right.
sometimes it's just education of the public as well, and you just try to take it with a grain of salt and go, hey, look, just go get some allergy medication, see if that helps. Right? Follow up with your personal care physician, right? So
Right. I did a podcast not that long ago where it was entitled 911 Isn't Magic.
Yes.
Do you agree, is 911 not really magic?
It is absolutely not magic. It's I think that there are some folks who expect it to be. I we get a lot of calls for just sometimes really unusual things. Sometimes it's someone calling for I saw someone walking and they didn't look like they felt well. Okay, so we try to find this person. We drive around looking for them. Um, by the same token, we have uh, people will call me. I had a young lady call me last shift for her apartment was too hot. Her air conditioning didn't work very well, and it. So I just try to okay. Well, have you talked to the building manager? Have you? It's a lot of problem solving, right? And it's a lot of
Mhm.
like okay, but you have to kind of suss out like wait was this a medical emergency because it came out as a respiratory call, right? But it just turned out that my apartment's too hot. I don't know how to fix. I don't. This air conditioner's not working very well, and I'm like, okay, so yeah, by the same token, not magic at all. And also to your point or about not being magic, um, public safety as a whole throughout the country is really experiencing a lot of folks leaving the whether it's law enforcement or EMS or fire. The last 2 years have been incredibly draining as a both mentally and physically,
Mhm.
and two with budget cuts, that whole thing, especially on the law enforcement side. When you say not magic, something that comes to mind to me is we the law. Austin Police Department is very short staffed, as are we. I think we're the shortest staffed of all three public agencies, but they're super short staffed by like 500 some officers, I think. And so we've had a call where this was not long ago where we had a call for a stabbing, and we will stage not far from the address and wait for law enforcement to clear the scene, make sure the scene's safe before we go in, right? And law enforcement's like, it was a busy Saturday night, so no units available, no units available. We're waiting 45 minutes for this person who's waiting for the magic to show up to appear at your house, right?
Right.
And so finally the patient calls and is like, hey, I'm going to the hospital on my own. I can't wait for you guys any longer. And I'm like, well, that one, I'm glad that they did seek care, right? But by the
Hmm.
same token, that is a tough problem that's facing a lot of public safety throughout the country now.
Hmm. Yeah, we've just had 2 years of a pandemic, and then all of a sudden the police aren't popular, and then you have situations like where you're short staffed and stuff. So
Yeah,
I mean, I hear all the time, and I understand the sentiment behind this, that you really are your own first responder, right? You are the person who
absolutely.
has to take care of yourself first.
Yes. Yeah, and that is huge. I've always sort of had that mindset. I grew up in semi-rural Western North Carolina, so we were always I was just sort of grew up as a very self-reliant. It's what we
Mhm.
did. You figured out how to do things on your own. It's interesting now. I think now more and more, especially with like law enforcement numbers getting smaller, right? You see crime on the rise. We're seeing more and more medical emergencies on my side of the house, right? And we're incredibly short staffed. And so, I mean, we have a large system in Austin, and often like there'll be no ambulances for a few minutes, like anywhere in the city to go, just because we're so busy. And you really do have to become your own first responder, whether it's for like whether you're the victim of a crime, whether whether that means being prepared, not being in bad places, or
Mhm.
just that
Mhm.
situational awareness that you and I are so big on,
Oh yeah.
or just understanding some basic medical care if you're in a car wreck, or even so more to the point if you're in a rural area. So, if you're a rural area, sometimes EMS isn't that close to you, or it's a smaller department, or you happen to be maybe you're traveling. Right? I often drive from Austin down to Corpus Christi, and I take the back
Mhm.
route. And there are sections where I want to know where the closest trauma center is in between those, because those are high risk traffic areas. Get these old 2-lane highways,
Mhm.
and I've seen any number of wrecks, on that type of thing. So I want to. I carry a kit in my car because you really are your own first responder. I carry a little more than probably the usual person,
Sure.
but I also have like a basic first aid IFAC as well, a personal first aid kit, and I've have like the usuals in it too with Benadryl, ibuprofen, Tylenol, the band-aids, the small things that you might need, as well as like tourniquets, chest seals, that kind of thing. So yeah, you really do need to kind of prepare for your own possible emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was reminded of that the other weekend. Went out with two of my dad friends and their sons, and we went out to the lake and we were hanging out on this island. And it's literally just this island out in the middle of the lake. And I brought my first aid kit just in case, and just sitting out there. And while there's all these other boaters that are out there, and there's people around, but if one of these kids breaks a leg or cuts themselves pretty bad,
Hmm.
there's not a response on a lake like there is on a suburban neighborhood. And that really kind of brought it home to me that, man, if something goes wrong, it's on me. I gotta step up here and do it. And I was prepared for that. And that was a good feeling to have. So you mentioned situational awareness. You and I both love that topic a lot, and we both
Absolutely.
appreciate Greg and Brian out of Acadia Cognerati. Tell me how you use your understanding of situational awareness and human behavior in your everyday life.
I so I probably have the opportunity to use it more than the ordinary citizen, so to speak,
Sure.
right? I go into a lot of neighborhoods that are, like lower income neighborhoods. I go into a lot of areas that are just unusual. I go pretty much anywhere someone calls an ambulance to, right? So I feel like I probably use it a lot more. So I get a lot more reps, if that makes sense, right? I get a lot more time on task with it. I also teach it for our incoming
Mhm.
cadets and our community health paramedics and our defensive tactics stuff. But man, I use it pretty much every day. You start in the military, I'm just very cognizant of my surroundings. I'm also, I'm not so alert that I'm constantly hyper alert where I
Mhm.
just drain myself, because it can be that's a heavy cognitive load
Yes.
as well.
Mhm.
But again, I'm lucky in that I sort of get that stress inoculation through the job, because if I'm driving emergency traffic, or code 3 as we call it, to a call, I'm very cognizant of traffic. I'm very cognizant, if we're clearing an intersection, and by the same token, just parking your vehicle off to the side of the road, like say at a car, at a vehicle accident, right? Park at an angle. I want to get out, look towards traffic, and then I'll walk towards the back and come around so I can keep my eye on traffic as I come around. If I'm getting back in the ambulance, I'll come from the front so I can see traffic as I'm getting in, opening the door, and then getting in. So all those things sort of really uh, link into all these different ideas of situational awareness that I teach and that I talk about. And two, there's that interpersonal connection too, where we look at baselines and anomalies that you've talked about so amazingly on the podcast. Because I think that needs to be talked about more, right?
Mhm.
Understanding those baselines and anomalies, because we see these anomalies, especially with patients who may be, say, polypharm overdose or multiple drug overdose, or they're have alcohol on board, something like that, where we're trying to sort of predict more like what they may or may not do, try to get a better idea, give ourselves the gift of time and distance, as Brian and Greg talk about so eloquently, that I've unabashedly stolen from my course, but I give them credit when I teach it,
Mhm.
right? But
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, it's huge in my everyday life. I'm super cognizant. I'm cognizant when I drive. I'm cognizant of my surroundings. And again, I'm lucky in that doing the job I do, I get that. I get a lot of reps, got a lot of time on task. So that helps a lot. But it's interesting, just you and I both talked to Brian and Greg, and so much of what they do is things they talk about, is things you think about every day, but you maybe never put a schema or a rubric to it. And that's
Mhm.
what's amazing about what those guys do. And I've really adopted more of that. So, and the more that I can learn and glean from any source, I feel like that makes me a better, more prepared person.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm picking up from what you're saying is you don't want to do um, dumb things at a dumb time of day with dumb people. That sort of thing. That's the kind of stuff. Actually, oh gosh, Texas Spy Dad, who's been on the show. I can never remember his real name. He said the rule
Yeah.
of stupids: don't do stupid things that do stupid places with stupid times of the day. So, with that, what are some? What are I don't want to use you. I want to be protective of your job here. I don't want to
Sure,
say this.
sure.
What are some things? What are some calls that you have showed up to where you are like, yeah, this was stupid people doing stupid things at a stupid time of the day? What are some of those situations that we don't need to find ourselves in?
Yeah. I find some really odd I find myself in odd situations when I get there, because I'll read, it'll come out as a certain call, and then
Mhm.
I'll read the call text, and I'm like, what's going on here? Right. And so then I show up on scene, and I'm like, wow, and sometimes it's not, sometimes it is people just doing stupid things or being like, why were you doing this? Why were you here? What's, like, then there's sometimes where someone, they take something in an odd way. I'll give you an example. I ran a call on a person who was in an indoor soccer arena where you just go, and they have leagues and all that. And there are signs everywhere saying, watch out for flying soccer balls, and you just, and beware. And so this person's sitting in a chair, and there's a couple of other individuals over, and they're just kicking the soccer ball back and forth. Soccer ball bounces off a table, flies over, and hits this person in the leg. And so they call 911. And so they were assaulted, and the assailant is on scene with a soccer ball. And so I'm like, what? I'm like, I gotta go to this call and find out what happened, right? And it's interesting, right? But it's interesting because the person is literally sitting 10 feet in front of a sign that says "Beware flying soccer balls." It's interesting how people take things sometimes, right? Sometimes, because in the call text it said, they just kept playing and acted like nothing happened. I'm like, well, so I went in and I'm like, hey, they have security cameras everywhere, sort of for that same sort of thing, and I watched the video, and like the guy who kicked the soccer ball was very nice to the person, like you could tell he's apologizing to them, and like anyone, and then the person like sits there for a little bit, and then they call 911 and come outside, and I'm trying to explain to them, like they want law enforcement on scene, they want this person kicked out, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I will call. I mean, I'm here to give you, do you need medical help? Can I take you to the ER, that kind of thing. So sometimes it's just explaining those things. And then again, there are people who get in, let's say they were shot or stabbed. And when you get there, I'm like, hey, what happened? And they're like, well, I was just walking along minding my own business, and then this guy just shot or stabbed me. And I'm like, so you were to this back alley and you have these drugs on you, and then I find it hard to believe that perhaps,
right.
Or now sometimes it's people who, again, like you said, on the lake thing, right? We run a lot of water rescues here because we have a river that runs right through the middle of Austin. It kind of separates North and South Austin, and a lot of people like either paddleboard, stuff like that. So we have a pretty robust water rescue response to that. And Lake Travis, which is a very big tourist area, right? And big boating community. And so we run a lot of calls out there. But there's also an area called Kids Cliff where people jump off these really high cliffs, right? And so you have some people who've probably had too much alcohol, and they're like, it'd be a great idea to jump off this cliff, and I have rappelled down on more than one occasion to someone in the water who's got a broken leg, or worse, a broken femur. And we like trying to get them in, like, all right, we're going to try to hoist them out. Are we going to fly them out by starflight? Are we going to load them into a boat? What's the best way to get this patient out of the water? So a lot of times where the not great decisions come in is when alcohol and or drugs get involved with doing something. We see it, the scooters are big here in Austin. So we, for a while, we had a rash of scooter crashes downtown because they were everywhere, and people and it's a big party area, like 6th Street. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a street of bars, and everybody's like, I'm good, I can drive the scooter, and they're fast, right? So
yeah,
a lot of those. So
yeah, if
that gives you an idea.
Oh yeah, man. It's funny you're talking about the whole soccer ball thing. I used to I still on occasion do sports videography, and I have shot college soccer, and I will be in the lift that's up behind one of the goals, and I am surprised at how inaccurate college soccer players are, because I will be a good 10 feet up above the goal and the ball will come whizzing by my head, that sort of stuff. And those come in pretty good. But I was actually on a lift one night right before a game. I hadn't gone up yet. And there had been this young lady there, and she had gotten onto a scooter and pulled out in front of traffic, didn't look, got hit by a car. And by the time I turned around, there was just this empty helmet rolling down the street from where we were. And I'm like, because the college kids were renting those scooters back and forth. It was like this timeshare thing. And I'm like, I don't understand the appeal of them, but yeah, that just seems like a dangerous situation. One, being on one of those scooters, and two, alcohol and all of that being involved as well.
It's a horrible idea, and people love to make that decision for some reason downtown. I had a businessman one time, well dressed, nice suit, and he had just came from a business meeting, probably in his late 50s, early 60s, and he was like, you know what, I think it'd be a good idea to take this scooter back to my hotel. And oh, neither him or the suit fared very well in that crash. So
Ugh. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good. So I know you probably get asked all sorts of, funny questions about what you've done and all that sort of stuff. But I always like to ask the people who are first responders that come onto my show, what's a funny story that you can share with us about a call that you've been on? Obviously, showing up for a paper cut, that's pretty unusual.
yeah,
But what's one that kind of sticks out to you about, oh man, I can't believe I found myself in this place at this time helping this person.
yeah. Uh, so one of the, I don't know if it's funny or more fascinating or interesting, the places that people will put things in their body is often interesting to me, because I've transported a number of those, and
Uh-huh.
those are always popular at ERs when
Mhm.
you encode and you're like, hey, we have this thing. And by the same token, the things that people will put in themselves is always fascinating to me, from like light bulbs to like bottles to all kinds of different things, right? And that's always because I always wonder, like, what was the thought process like? I'm like, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm trying to wrap my head around how that occurs.
Yeah, because if it's glass and it breaks, that's a really
Yeah,
bad day.
the light bulb really gave me a queasy feeling, because I'm like, why would you do that? And I was like, why would you choose a light bulb? I just feel like that's not a the structural integrity. And this is me trying to understand, like, the structural integrity of a light bulb isn't that good. And they're like, but that being said, you see, uh, you see the odd, the funny, the strange, the like, oh my God, that happened. You know, um, it's funny. I love that you asked that question about what's the funniest thing you see, because often I get, what's the
Mhm.
worst thing you see? And
Oh yeah, I don't like it.
I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, my
yeah,
friend, you don't even want to know, because
mm-mm.
it's horrible, But
Yeah.
um, sometimes some of the things that you see that are like near misses are
Mm.
funny in retrospect. And you like you're just so surprised that you see some car trying to stop for the ambulance, and some other car shoots around them and misses us and misses the other car, and where you have that moment like, oh my God, that just happened. No, but I think the unusual insertions of things in people is always interesting to me. And those are always, initially at first I'm concerned, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm like, oh, okay, what, all right, what was that? And
Mhm.
then, and then it's kind of on the retrospectively, I'm like, whew, I'm so sorry, my friend, like that. But I mean, you got to admit, that's a pretty good story, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Your night's not gonna get any better from here, buddy. I'm
yeah, and
sorry.
like,
Yeah.
and you're gonna have a great story after that. I will tell you something, just as a side note, that was sort of interesting. I had a guy who crashed this really nice Ford F-150 truck. He fell asleep driving, and
Mm.
I have never seen a truck that was so completely demolished, and he had not a scratch on him. He hit one of those light poles at probably 60, 65 miles an hour. I've got pictures of the truck.
Uh-huh.
It is just, I've never seen the carnage to an entire vehicle like this was on this truck. And this guy was fine. He crawled out
Yeah.
through the window and he was like,
Mhm.
man. And I'm like, wow, you should buy a lottery ticket right now, my friend, because that is the most, I've never seen a vehicle destroyed in that fashion. And I mean, it was like, I have to show you, I'll send you the picture.
Oh
It's
yeah, yeah.
beyond your ability to fathom. And then someone, he's like, not a scratch. And he's like,
Mhm.
I'm fine. And I'm like, they make cars a lot better than they used to.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so, man.
Yeah,
That's nuts. Well, as we wrap things up here, I'll ask you one more question.
absolutely.
For the parents who are listening to this show, what is one thing that you wish parents knew about keeping their kids safe?
Oh,
That's a
the
hard question.
yeah, it is. It is. I guess there's got to be. I don't have kids. I just have, because me having kids is like the blind leading the blind. To be perfectly honest, I'm a big kid myself, right? But it's because there's got to be parameters and structure with kids, but too, you've got to let them explore and learn. I think the biggest thing with kids and parents, if I could give them any advice, is to remain calm when something
Mhm.
goes awry, or if something occurs, especially if that kid's injured, right? The calmer they stay, the better it's going to be for the kid. That's the biggest thing. 'Cause I've seen I've seen both extremes of that scenario. The one with the dog bite where the mom was so amazing and it made everything so much better, right? And I've seen some where a kid is just literally like fell off a scooter or a bicycle or something, and the mom is just going crazy, and the kid is like, okay, mom's freaking out, then I need to freak out, right? Because things have obviously gone awry. And
Mhm.
so it's the extremes, you know, in that, in it's hard to treat a child anyway, right? Because
Yeah.
we're a whole new thing shown to them, like, you know, they can't rationalize like an adult. It's like, okay, I got hurt, the ambulance is coming, going to help me out.
Mhm.
um the one other thing I will say, and I find this odd, as far as parents, it's uh don't ask your children what they should do about their medical procedures, right? I've had parents like, well, do
Mhm.
you want to go to the hospital? Do you want to go to the doctor? You know, and the kid's going to be like, what? No, I do not want to, you know, like, I mean,
Right.
let's make the decision, you know, you're like, hey, look, I feel like, you know, we need to take this child to the hospital, right? Or to, you know, to an ER, you know.
Mhm.
Like, it's always odd to me when like parents will defer to like a 4 or 5 year old, like that, like the 4 or 5 year old is going to make a great medical decision for themselves in the moment. So
Right.
yeah. So that's the two big ones, right? Like,
Yeah, no,
remain
and those are
calm.
great.
Yeah, remain calm, and, you know, make a informed decision with your paramedic that shows up.
Very good, Walt. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Thank you for sharing these stories and everything. Tell everybody a little bit more about where they can find you online.
You can find me at a couple of places. Right? So you can find me at The Distinguished Savage on Instagram. That's mainly where I hang out. You can find my podcast, Distinguished Savage, on all podcast platforms, whether it be Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, all the platforms, all the platforms. Uh, Not, I don't have a website yet, right? I'm trying to follow in your shoes, right? Trying to be like you. I got a website coming, working on that, working on a few
Good.
things with that, a blog coming up. So that's the next big thing. You can still reach me at Walt at thedistinguishedSavage.com though. So I do have an email address for that. But Instagram is the biggest place to hit me up. And I talk to some amazing people on there, but you
Mhm.
included, right? That's how you and I first met. And I found your podcast.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, you posted pictures on Instagram of you, you know, getting your new podcast studio. And I
Mhm.
saw that and I was like, you know what? I've really got to get my act together here and I've got to get a better place. So you were actually the first person that I have interviewed in this new office. So um,
I'm honored.
I'm looking up to you, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, man. I was at the kitchen table for a long time, and my
Mhm.
girlfriend's like, "Hey, what are we doing here?" I'm
Yeah,
like,
this
"It's a
doesn't
good
look too
place."
serious if it's just at the
Yeah,
kitchen table, right?
yeah. I just keep asking people over, "Hey, you want to come sit in my kitchen and talk for a while?" So now I have something a little more. Looks.
Mhm.
I'm always like, "Come to the studio," and they're like, "Okay." I'm like, "Well, it's a room in my house, but it's just
Right.
this."
Yeah, it's still a studio, right? Nobody
Yeah,
has to know.
exactly.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing and be safe out there, buddy.
Absolutely. You too, brother. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.